Hello, and welcome to Cake Tools 101 by Cake Sister of DC. Today, my objective is just to teach you some basic tools that you would use in cake baking. We will start with a basic mat. That is very important for measurement. You would use the mat by placing fondant on the mat, and you would roll the fondant out to the desired size of the cake. We have the 8-inch, 10-inch, and 16-inch round here. And we also have at the bottom numbers by inches. If you're doing a border, you would be able to measure your border here. And we also have centimeters at the top. A good thing about the cake mat, it also has measurements. It has metrics, equivalents, and volumes, and ounces, and teaspoons and tablespoons. It also has temperature, oven temperature, Fahrenheit and Celsius. So it's a good tool to have for a number of reasons. Another very important thing are cake pans. You have cake pans when you're baking cakes. We have 3 different sizes here. We have a 10-inch with a 3-inch height cake pan. We have an 8-inch cake pan, 3 inches height, and then we have what is called a semicircle ball. This also has a bottom to it where I can make a complete ball. So you would place this in the oven on top of this here, and you would bake it, and you would get your concave or circular cake. The next thing we have is a turntable, a cake turntable. This is a turntable that you would use here, and the turntable spins. It spins around, so when you're decorating a cake, you would be able to turn the cake. Instead of you walking around and moving, you would be able to turn the cake by the turntable. We have what are cake boards. This is a standard cake board here. You would place this cake board on top of the turntable, and then you would place the cake on top of the cake board. We also have a decorative scalloped cake board as well that you could use that has a nicer design for fancier cakes. And then we have here is a cake drum. A cake drum, a lot of bakers use these for fancy cakes as well. You could also place ribbon around the sides and make it very decorative, and you would sit that on top of the turntable as well. Another very important tool are what we call spatulas. We have 2 here. They're angled. These are called offset spatulas. This is the first angle offset spatula, and this is a smaller one. You would use the large offset spatula when you're actually icing your cake and you're dealing with a large area of frosting. You would use the smaller one when you're smoothing the edges on the top of the cake or some small area of the cake, the small offset spatula. Then we have flat spatulas. The flat spatulas also, we have a large and a small. The same concept. You would use the large when you're dealing with a large area of the cake, and a small one with a small area. Another very important tool is called a bench scraper. The bench scraper is very important to get a precise and very neat cake. You would place your cake here and say you have already pre-frosted, and you're putting your icing on, and you want it to look really smooth. So you would use the bench scraper. You have your cake on the turntable, and you would scrape the cake to smooth out the icing. The bench scraper here. Another tool for smoothing would be a cake smoother. The cake smoother, you mainly use this when you're dealing with fondant. You would use the bench scraper when you're dealing with icing. The cake smoother you would use on top of the cake with the fondant, and then you would go around the sides to smooth it as well once you cut the bottom of the fondant. Very important, when you have the fondant on the cake, you're going to need to cut some of the fondant around the sides, and you would use what's called a standard pizza roller, and then you would cut the sides of the fondant off. that reduces weight to the fondant. So you want to do that as soon as you can, so that you won't have a weight issue that can cause holes on the fondant. Another thing that's great is to have is what's called a paring knife. A paring knife is a small knife, a really small knife, that you would be able to use to cut into fondant as well, in a small area. Or if you're doing an intricate design, you could use the paring knife to cut in the fondant. Another thing, of course, is to always have scissors, have food grade scissors. They're only to be used on your cake designs or your cakes. You would not use these to cut paper or anything else. So always have a pair of food safe scissors. When you're rolling out fondant, you would need what's called a roller. We have two different size rollers here as well. You would use the large roller when you're rolling out large areas of fondant, or just anything. You might sometimes, have to roll out royal icing or marzipan or anything of that nature. You would use the large roller. Then you also have the small roller. The small roller is when you're dealing with a small design, alphabet or something that you're going to put on the cake, and you're dealing with a small amount of fondant. Then we have molds. We have cake molds. This is a unicorn head mold here, and you would put the fondant inside of here, and then you would close it, and then you would use the roller and you would roll over it to get the desired effect, and then you would cut if you had any excess fondant on the sides. And this is a complete set. We have the ears, and then we have the eyelashes. Another very important tool we have, and there are 3 different kinds here. We have what are called treat sticks, or what cake bakers use as bones for a cake. We use these a lot of times when we're doing tiered cakes. A tiered cake is when you have a cake that maybe it's normally 2 cakes, or sometimes it's 2 cakes that we slice into 4, and you would put this down in the cake, maybe about 4 or 5 of them in strategic places, so that the next cake, if we had a cake here, we will put the treat sticks down in there, and then we would be able to sit the next tier on top like such. It would cause a weight effect there. And we have a small one and a large one. A lot of times these are also used for cake pops as well. Then we have the wooden sticks with the beveled tip here. These serve the same purpose. A lot of times when you're getting to the higher cakes and you want to be able to go through more than 1 tier of a cake, you would use these. And the great thing about these, they would punch through a cardboard box because it has the beveled end. So it would go all the way through this to the bottom of the cake, and then you would just continue to build on the cake. Then we have our standard cutters. We have cutters here. This one here would be used for like a border. If you wanted to say happy birthday, you would use this on the fondant to cut down in the fondant. So it's a cutter. You have all kinds of shapes and sizes of cutters. Here is a really neat and cool Mickey Mouse cutter that I have here. The Mickey Mouse cutter, you would just cut in the fondant. You would roll the fondant out with your cake roller, and you would just press down in the fondant and cut the Mickey Mouse shape for your cake. This one is for a border. Like I was telling you on the measurements here, you would roll the fondant out, and you could take this, it does it 2 at a time, and you would cut, and cut. It makes it a lot easier. You could also use the pizza roller to get the same desired effect. The last thing we're going to talk about are brushes. There are several different types of brushes that you can use for different things, and there are even more than this that I have, but I'm going to show you just simple brushes. We have a brush as such here. You would use this brush when you are painting a cake. Sometimes you might have to paint a cake a particular color or a metallic, and you need to use a brush. You can use a standard brush as such here. Then we have two smaller brushes. This one here has a finer tip. You would just dab this in a little small bowl of water, and when you're putting your designs on, say you had a circle like this, and you wanted to put the circle on the cake, so you would just cut your fondant, and then you would put a dab of water on your brush, and you would put a little water on your cake, and you would put your fondant on your cake. This one, when you're doing a bigger area, you would use one with a little more of a brush on it here. So those are the tools of the trade, and I just want to thank you for your attention today with Cake Sister of DC Cake Basic Tools. Thank you.